Alright folks, as most of you probably already know, lately I've been discussing the progression of various necessities for survival in the Walking Dead universe, and one of the most requested topics for this series I've gotten has been the evolution of settlements over the various eras. What began as basic survival camps in the early days gradually evolved into full-on communities with trade networks, only to be overshadowed by even larger superpowers that would go on to reshape the wasteland entirely. So today, I wanted to take a look at the most common forms of settlements in each era, what led to each shift in the status quo, and what this progression could mean for the future of civilization in the apocalypse. But with that, if you end up enjoying this video, I'd greatly appreciate it if you hit that like button and drop a sub to see more content like this. When society collapsed across the world as the dead began roaming the streets on August 27, 2010, the military was quickly deployed throughout rural and urban America in an attempt to contain the chaos before it got out of control, setting up fenced-in safe zones in designated areas that acted as strategic strongpoints to aid in their on-the-ground campaign. Within heavily populated cities such as Los Angeles, anyone caught outside the fences was shot on sight, regardless of infection, in an effort to prevent the further spread, while those on the inside were safe from walkers and fed relatively well, but lived under strict military rule with most of their rights stripped away. However, this hostility to outsiders doesn't appear to be universal across the country, as the Torn Apart webisode shows the military airlifting civilians to Atlanta for safety, which is later elaborated on in Season 1, Episode 2, when Glenn outright states broadcasts were instructing people to head to Atlanta as they were in the process of setting up safe zones, believing it would be far easier to protect everyone in one place. An inevitably fatal mistake, but suggested the military's approach to the situation was quite different depending on the region. But ultimately, their success or failure didn't matter, as just 12 days after the initial outbreak, the federal government would recall most soldiers to the various military bases across the country, as the Air Force was sent in to bomb every major metropolitan area with napalm as a last resort attempt to contain the calamity in what was dubbed Operation Cobalt, which ironically doomed America even further for years to come. Every established safe zone set up within these cities was lost, and with them, the civilians left behind, while those in rural safe zones out of Operation Cobalt's reach were left stranded without further orders as raiders, walkers, infighting, or rebellion due to the mistreatment of civilians eventually brought their end as well. The lucky few who were able to escape the flames and soldiers would have no choice but to begin setting up temporary camps as they waited for some form of rescue that never came. This, of course, often came in the form of traditional setups in the woods, but you could occasionally find abandoned camps in all sorts of places like subway tunnels or water parks. Some would have no choice but to go it alone and live a nomadic life, moving from house to house and eating literally whatever they could. But it was just as common for like-minded survivors to band together and pool their collected resources while braving the early days as one. Months would go by with camps like the one outside Atlanta relying on boiling water, hunting game, and looting the ruins of cities. But eventually, in time, most realized they were on their own and needed to find a more sustainable way of life. Even those who initially took shelter in private bunkers or sailed the seas to escape death could only last on their hoarded supplies for so long. So within a year, survivors across America would begin looking towards establishing an actual life in the anarchy through rudimentary leadership, marking the beginning of a new phase within the apocalypse: Fortified Settlements. Some survivors would attempt to hold onto the old world by setting up shop in the upper levels of skyscrapers while growing crops on the roofs. But for the most part, walls and fences were what you were looking for, as survivors commonly took over prisons, private estates, stadiums, storage units, factories, etc., while others, with the right resources, constructed their own walls and barriers, further opening up their choices for settling, as heritage sites, neighborhoods, and schools were now viable picks. But unfortunately, the wasteland was a harsh, unforgiving place. So eventually, despite doing everything right in theory, most of these settlements would fall due to raiders and walkers alike coming for what they had. However, those who were able to brave the horrors of the apocalypse or build back their losses would begin entering a new era of settlement building. Take Alexandria, for example, the only known designated safe zone from the early days that still stands in the modern era. Despite enduring attacks from raiders and massive walker hordes, the safe zone had managed to survive and rebuild thanks to their strong leadership and united population. And in time, Alexandria would come into contact with 3 other lasting settlements known as the Hilltop, Kingdom, and Oceanside, who were all looking to establish a trade network between their communities. The Hilltop was known for its abundance of crops, and the Kingdom too had frequently grown its own food and raised pigs found in the city, while Oceanside, of course, had an abundance of fish. So with Alexandria's like-minded way of life, the safe zone was able to simply exchange weapons for resources, which proved the benefit of working together. The only issue, a tyrannical group known as the Saviors, led by the ruthless Negan, had been oppressing the communities and robbing them of half their grown, traded, or looted supplies every month, showing us just how naive they were in thinking this was more sustainable than just working peacefully with the farmers in other communities to establish their own crops, as despite the sanctuary failing to grow its own food due to it being a factory, there were many outposts capable of being converted to farms. So although the Saviors' way of taking supplies may have worked for a couple years, it was only a matter of time before the people would fight back and arrest the madman as a symbol of society's reemergence, allowing our new established Washington-based coalition to enter a more medieval era in peace, as modern forms of gas had long expired. Clearly, playing well with others is a vital aspect to a settlement's survival, which the Saviors failed to realize. And because of that, the Sanctuary was left behind to history, much like other sadistic compounds such as Terminus before it, as law and diplomacy was re-established. Other growing coalitions did exist across the country, such as Lawton in the south, but unfortunately, they were at the mercy of an insane cult leader who gained access to nuclear weaponry, wiping out their network of settlements entirely. So up until around the 10-year mark, we were under the impression our Washington-based coalition was the ideal way of life in the wasteland. They were turning to the past to help with the present by constructing windmills and water wheels to generate power, while reverse engineering farming equipment for greater production. In Season 8, Georgie claimed that what our survivors had built was extremely rare, which Maggie later confirmed during her journey away from the coalition, explaining that every settlement she tried to start inevitably fell apart. This perspective was only reinforced when we were introduced to the Whisperers, an animalistic group who wore the skin of the dead while living among them. If a large nomadic group like this could exist out there by traveling the country while living off the land, and nothing of worth was found or sustained on Maggie's 6-year journey, perhaps humanity really was regressing, and the coalition they've built was society's best shot at rebuilding. Well, that perspective was shattered when we were introduced to the super colonies, various city-sized settlements and municipalities across the country with populations each numbering in the tens of thousands. I keep referring to these videos as the evolution of whatever, but the truth is, it's only progress from the perspective of our survivors, as these monumental colonies had existed since the beginning of the outbreak in secrecy, the largest of which being the Civic Republic of Philadelphia and military, the reformed remnants of the Pennsylvania National Guard who fought back against the Air Force during Operation Cobalt and saved Philadelphia from total destruction. The CRM, being a military faction, were capable of maintaining aircraft and producing their own fuel, while developing all kinds of New World tactics for maintaining their population and combating the dead. They were so advanced that they were able to supply 2 other surviving cities, Portland and Omaha, along with an offshoot known as the Campus Colony, with resources for a decade, as they supposedly couldn't produce anything on their own, making up what we know as the Alliance of Three, while the Commonwealth in Ohio existed as an independent super colony apart from the Alliance that was completely self-sustaining. This was the status quo for years until the CRM's leader, Major General Beale, came to the conclusion the Civic Republic's population wouldn't be sustainable if they kept supplying their allies. So, looking to eliminate the quote-unquote threat, Beale covertly ordered the destruction of all 3 allied super colonies through the use of chlorine gas. Omaha and the Campus Colony were successfully eliminated during these attacks, but Portland was spared thanks to the actions of Rick and Michonne, who took down the CRM's rogue leadership with a single explosion before reforming them into a force for good in America. While the Commonwealth avoided this conflict entirely thanks to their independence, but went through its own internal revolution that ended with their values aligning with our survivors in Virginia. The existence of these super colonies was obviously quite the surprise, as up until this point, we were led to believe the world was dead outside of what our survivors had built, but that was far from the truth, and in a way, kind of undermines the importance of all-out war, although it did usher in a new era of peace in the wastelands, so perhaps the sacrifice was worth it. Following these monumental shifts, the eastern US had seemingly begun to stabilize. We even see survivors banding together in areas without walls while looking for work, such as what we see with the men at the mechanics yard in Daryl Dixon, who talk of having families back home, which, to me, implies the influence of the super colonies expanding and reaching out in the surrounding states have allowed those still remaining in the wasteland to live peaceful lives. Walkers have become a manageable threat, and in some cases, a useful resource. And with various armies patrolling the surrounding areas and infrastructure growing, it's now a lot harder to live the life of a raider. We see a similar situation over in France, as around this time, Paris appears to be relatively populated despite the dead still walking the streets. People can be seen living their normal lives in their apartments as the dead mill around below, while nightclubs have been re-established for those to come and go at will. Settlements do still exist out there, but for the most part they seem to be those of the Union of Hope, who are a resistance against Paris's most prominent faction, Pavor, although they appear to be hiding from Jimena more than anything. France never saw its cities bombed, so it's understandable why Paris is still so populated today. But to me, it's pretty cool to see America approaching a similar position where you can live on a farm with a couple defenses and never really run into any issues. I mean, what would raiders really want from you when one of these superpowers has mostly everything available? Which brings us to the modern day, with Dead City taking place around 17 years in, where brand new coalitions such as the New Babylon Federation are springing up and taking what we saw in Daryl Dixon even further. Walled-in settlements do still exist, of course, but the capital of New Babylon operates with open towns and fields as marshals patrol the streets while keeping them clear of walkers and crime. This has led to bars and motels being open with power in areas that used to be plagued in anarchy thanks to the production of biofuels from the various settlements. And although the only known colony in the West as of now is Portland, I think it's safe to say the influence and stability in the East will eventually spread throughout the rest of the country if it hasn't already. We've seen settlements transition from military safe zones to basic camps before evolving into fortified settlements operating on trade networks and discovering giant super colonies largely resembling that of the old world. And now, some areas of the country are beginning to enter a post-settlement era of expansion, where the need for giant walls is slowly fading. And unlike in the early days, survivors now have a choice to where they want to live. Do you enjoy the city life with more amenities? Well, we've got that. Do you enjoy a more suburban lifestyle surrounded by walls with a tight-knit community? Well, you can find that too. Or do you enjoy the more rugged lifestyle free from confinement? Well, there are tons of places looking for work. Or hell, just go loot some ruins and trade your goods at the nearest Civic Republic outpost. It appears new states are forming in the ruins of the old world, so only time will tell if we see a new united America develop or remain entirely independent societies. Regardless of what happens, it's clear the age of surviving the apocalypse is ending, and the era of rebuilding has begun. But what do you guys think? Are you satisfied with the direction settlements have taken, expanding and progressing into full-on societies? Or do you prefer the days of small communities developing their own independent cultures? Do you think the existence of the super colonies undermines the sense of progress made throughout the series? Or do you feel like this bigger fish dynamic was a natural evolution in the story? I'm excited to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. But that's gonna do it for me today, folks. As always, thank you so much for watching.